Shortly after taking office in January, President Donald Trump signed an executive order that froze nearly all U.S. foreign humanitarian aid. Most of this money was distributed through the U.S. Agency for International Development, better known as USAID. In the months following, the agency was quickly dismantled. The nearly 10,000 people employed by the organization was heavily reduced, with many put on leave or fired. In the following months, there were some legal challenges, but nothing came to fruition. As of last month, USAID has officially closed its doors, and this quiet end has stirred up new emotions. For many, the closure of this agency, which has been in operation since 1961, means an end to helping those who need it most.
Foreign assistance has three components. One component is humanitarian assistance, which is providing life-saving medical care, food, clean water, blankets, tents to people who have suffered from a natural disaster like floods or hurricanes, or man-made disasters like conflicts and wars. Think about Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan.
That's George Ingram, Senior Fellow in Global Economy and Development at the Brookings Institution and former Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID. While the agency was best known for its work in feeding and providing medical care for the most vulnerable global populations, Ingram says it played other roles as well.
The second bucket of foreign assistance is economic assistance. And this promotes the economic, social, and political institutions in countries that support economic growth and open societies that in turn creates like-minded countries and markets for U.S. products. The largest element of economic assistance is actually health assistance that builds systems and fights specific diseases. For example, smallpox has been wiped out around the world thanks to national and international assistance. And polio today is present in only 3 countries.
The agency was created 6 decades ago by Congress under President John F. Kennedy during the Cold War. Its purpose was to counter the Soviet Union with soft power by pushing development in other nations. Since then, the agency has launched programs in over 100 countries, yet only took up about 1% of the federal budget. So why shut it down? Some of the reasons President Trump has noted is corruption, abuse, and misuse of tax dollars at the agency. Ingram has other opinions.
Many of us who have worked on foreign assistance from all of our careers are critical of foreign aid and that there is too much of the money is spent on accountability to make sure that it's not abused in corruption. AID has an independent inspector general who investigates any report of any misuse of funds. You probably can't find 1% of U.S. assistance that is involved in any form of corruption or misuse. It's a totally false accusation.
Prior to the Trump administration, support for USAID didn't appear to be a partisan issue. Take PEPFAR, for example, the U.S. Global Health Initiative to fight the HIV/AIDS epidemic. When President George W. Bush introduced the idea to Congress, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle came together to fund what has become one of the most impactful foreign aid programs in history.
It's been quite consistent, except the Trump administration, that you've had Democratic administrations, presidential administrations, including starting with President Kennedy, and Republican administrations supporting assistance. In fact, when I was in Congress, we were part of a group of members that supported the time President George W. Bush's malaria initiative and emergency plan for AIDS relief, PEPFAR. And so that was under George W. Bush, a Republican president, where you saw the expansion of global health support. So it really hasn't been a particularly partisan issue. And you see even in polling numbers where usually a majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle support U.S. assistance and leadership globally. And certainly they should have and should expect that this money is being spent in the right way.
That's Jonathan Katz, Senior Director for the Anti-Corruption, Democracy, and Security Project at the Brookings Institution. Like Ingram, he is also a former Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID. As of 2023, PEPFAR has saved more than 25 million lives. For now, the program remains intact, but there's growing concern that the U.S. could also slash funding in the future. If that happens, along with cuts to other global health initiatives, Katz says the consequences could be catastrophic.
When we look at the numbers and we look at those that, millions of lives that have been saved, we've seen studies that show just in a 20-year period, when we look at sort of global health funding sort of provided by the United States, that it's saved over 90 million lives. And then we also see studies that show when the U.S. is pulling out that it's quite possible that you'll see millions of preventable deaths not prevented, including women and children, the most vulnerable.
And experts believe the effects of USAID's closure will hit home, too. As mentioned earlier, thousands of Americans have already lost their jobs, and many nonprofits that relied on the agency's funding may be forced to make cuts, too. Another common question has been, who's stepping up to fill the gap left by this closure? Typically, we'd look to other high-income countries to step in. But Katz says many of them, particularly in Europe, are redirecting their funds towards security rather than global development in response to growing threats from Russia and other conflicts. While private foundations are trying to help, Ingram is doubtful they'll be able to raise enough money to fill the void the U.S. has left.
There's a strong humanitarian instinct among the American people. U.S. foreign assistance by the federal government last year accounted for about $65 billion. But Americans as individuals contributed half that amount, $35 billion, to various causes around the world. There's only so much that private assistance can ramp up. And there are efforts to do that, but they're basically filling minor gaps in the short term. Secondly, the U.S. is the largest provider of assistance around the world. There's no other country that has the wealth of the United States that can step up and fill the gap that we are creating.
Though the future may look bleak, it's not hopeless. Like Ingram said, Americans have a strong humanitarian instinct, and there are other ways to make a difference. On interaction.org, you can find a list of over 200 nonprofit organizations that work around the world in the areas of health, economic growth, democracy, and environment.
Providing support and engaging directly with organizations that are providing support is going to be incredibly helpful right now. So that means thinking about organizations where there are going to be gaps. I don't think the expectation is that donors at the individual level are going to completely fill in the gap, but the need is so great that I think even small donor amounts are going to have an impact. But also remember, too, we're facing some of these very similar challenges here in the U.S. as well. And we're likely to see, it's almost a mirror where we see cuts on the U.S. domestic side for food programs like SNAP, where we're looking at healthcare. So there's going to be a challenge at home that I think Americans are going to have to sort of help address. And then these global challenges, which can't be ignored as well. They're all interconnected, but I have great faith that the Americans have been so generous with an outstretched hand with USAID previously that they'll recognize how important this is for the U.S.
To find out more about George Ingram, Jonathan Katz, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.